It has been a decade since a Gonzaga guard won WCC Defensive Player of the Year, a drought that Emmanuel Innocenti hopes to end this season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. So download the app today. Well, it is also number 9 in our player preview series. We're talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster coming into the season. A few of these are going to spill over into the first week of the season, but we're talking about these players' history, how they ended up here in Spokane, their best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. And then we close out the show talking about expected role, expected production, and what their future looks like, whether it's in Spokane, whether it is moving on to the professional basketball ranks. Number 9 on our list here, we talked about Tyon Grant-Foster on Wednesday's episode. Obviously a big one, as we are finally able to talk about what his season's going to look like now that we know he is eligible. Today, we're talking about a player that is impacted by the eligibility of Tyon Grant-Foster, and that is Emmanuel Innocenti. We're going to start talking about Innocenti's history. He is a 6'5" wing from Italy, came over to the United States to play college basketball, beginning his career at Tarleton State in the Western Athletic Conference, coached by the great Billy Gillispie, former Texas A&M and Kentucky coach, among other places. And Innocenti was a really great find by Gillispie and this Texans team. He was an immediately impactful contributor for Tarleton State as a true freshman in the 2023-24 season. He appeared in 35 games for Tarleton State and started 33 of them while averaging nearly 32 minutes per game. He was one of the leaders in the entire conference in total minutes played and minutes per game. And again, this was as a true freshman for that Tarleton State team. And he put up really good numbers. Emmanuel Innocenti is not much of a scorer, so the numbers are always going to be with that caveat in mind. But if you have played fantasy college basketball and you are looking for somebody that's maybe not going to contribute much in the scoring column, but that brings you a little bit of everything else, Innocenti was your guy as a freshman at Tarleton State. 6.6 points per game, but also 6.4 rebounds, 2.9 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. Shot about 47% on his 2-point attempts, about 31% on his 3-point attempts. That was on a little over 2 attempts per game. Again, 2 attempts per game in 32 minutes. So he certainly wasn't taking a whole lot of outside shots while at Tarleton State, but was not knocking them down at a super high clip either. Innocenti then hits the transfer portal and gets pursued by a handful of programs. Not a ton of interest in Innocenti, but St. Mary's was invested. There was a couple other local programs out on the West Coast that were invested as well. But ultimately, Gonzaga got involved and managed to convince Innocenti to come out to Spokane. And he played a very valuable role for Gonzaga last year. And we saw the ups and downs as the season went on for this team. All told, Innocenti appeared in 31 games as a sophomore for Gonzaga last year, started 3 of them, played about 12 minutes per night, finished the year averaging just under 2 points, 2 rebounds, and about 1 assist per game. The efficiency was down for Innocenti, under 42% on 2-pointers. Granted, it's a very important caveat that was on literally just 24 attempts. He was 10 of 24. From 3, he was 10 of 34, so about 29.5%. And again, very sparingly part of the rotation early in the season. In the non-conference, the 12 games Gonzaga played there, the 12 games that Innocenti appeared in the non-conference, he averaged just 5.2 minutes per game, only scored 9 points on 4 of 11 shooting. Most of that happened in games that were already well decided. He scored 2 points against Baylor, 2 points against UMass Lowell, 2 points against Nicholls State, hit a 3 against UCLA. Those were the only points he scored in the non-conference portion of the season. And even getting into conference play, Innocenti's role was still not significant early in the conference portion of the season. He played just 31 minutes across the first 5 WCC games that he appeared in, scored 6 points with 4 rebounds in those 5 games. But then something happened. Innocenti played 2 minutes in Gonzaga's loss to Oregon State in Corvallis, where they gave up 89 points, I believe is what it was, or I think 89 regulation points, and then got scored on more in overtime. Then they left Corvallis, went back home to Santa Clara, and lost to the Broncos, or went back home to play Santa Clara, lost to the Broncos, gave up 103 points at the McCarthy Athletic Center. First time that has ever happened. Innocenti did not play in that game, and at that point, Mark Few said, enough is enough. We got a week off before our next game against the Portland Pilots, and we're going to make some changes. For that game against Portland, I was in the house walking to my seat when I heard the announcer stating the starting lineup, and I thought I must have heard something wrong because he said Emmanuel Innocenti's name, and he is not a starter for this team. I was not wrong. Mark Few made the decision to start Innocenti. Again, a really important detail that he only played 2 combined minutes in those previous 2 games that Gonzaga lost to Oregon State and Santa Clara. So Mark Few knew, hey, this is maybe the missing piece. This is the part of the recipe that's not working, is we don't have our on-ball defender out on the floor. We're going to make a change there. Against Portland, he played 23 minutes. They were going to beat Portland regardless. That was part of the reason that they made the change, is to kind of inject a little bit of energy. They benched Graham Ike in that game, or not fully benched him, but did not start him in that game. They did not start Caleb Battle in that game. It was a message being sent to the team. But the message was well received, not by the whole team, or not only by the whole team, but definitely by Innocenti, who kind of bought into the notion of like, hey, when you get your chance, you got to take advantage of it. And after that game, even though Caleb Battle re-entered the starting lineup eventually, and obviously after Graham Ike did, and kind of things went back to quote unquote normal, Innocenti never played less than 16 minutes in a single game the rest of the season. He immediately became a part of Gonzaga's rotation, and that did not change from that point forward. He started only 3 games. He started that game, 2 more after that, against Oregon State at home, and then against St. Mary's on the road. Played 17 minutes against Oregon State, 28 minutes against St. Mary's, and then again, back to the bench after that, but he played 16-plus minutes every single game. In the final 10 West Coast Conference regular season games, Innocenti averaged 21.8 minutes, 3.7 points, 3.3 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Played 15 minutes against both St. Mary's and San Francisco in the WCC tournament. And he played 19 minutes with 3 points, 3 boards, and 3 assists against Georgia in the NCAA tournament. And then 21 minutes, 3 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, and a steal in that game against Houston. Coming into the season, we knew Innocenti was going to have a bigger role this upcoming season. He played a little bit at craziness, 13 minutes out of the 20 at that event, but he did exit early with a hip injury. While he was on the floor, he scored 3 points, was 1 of 2 from the field. I love that he was picking up Braden Smith like 75 feet away from the rim. It was very good to see him continuing to do what he does best, which is on-ball defense, but also a reminder of the amount of pressure that he is putting on Gonzaga's ball handlers in practice, which is only serving to make this team better coming into the season. Because of the hip injury, Innocenti did not play in the game against Northwest University, the NAIA opponent, on October 19th, but he did play against Western Oregon on Monday, and in fact, he started. He started that game alongside Braden Smith, alongside Steele Venters, Graham Ike, and Braden Huff, meaning that Adam Miller, who had started against Northwest, was relegated to the bench. Innocenti only played 12 minutes. He indicated before the game that he was not going to play a significant amount because he was still kind of coming back from that hip injury. So the 12 minutes is probably not necessarily indicative of what his role might look like going forward this year. And he was great. 6 points, 3 assists, 3 steals, 2 rebounds. He was 3 of 3 from the field, basically because his points were stealing the ball, driving down the other lane, and dunking it. That is how he did the majority of his damage, and that is a way that he is going to do a lot of damage this upcoming season. The main question for Innocenti and for Gonzaga at this point is whether that starting spot was just Mark Few continuing to tinker, whether it was rewarding him for something that happened in practice, or whether it's something they are seriously considering or planning to do when the season starts on November 3rd against Texas Southern. And we're going to talk about that. What does Innocenti's role look like in a very crowded backcourt and wing rotation for Gonzaga? We'll get to that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of a game or you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late run. Gonzaga's odds for the national championship hold steady at plus 3,500. Meanwhile, the odds for Graham Ike to win the Wooden Award are also at plus 5,000. If you're feeling good about any of those or any of the other odds as game odds are starting to come out, then go check it out. FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when their first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up now and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still going through our Emmanuel Innocenti player preview episode, getting ready for the 25-26 season, which is now less than a week away from getting started on November 3rd against Texas Southern. We're going to talk best and worst case scenarios for Emmanuel Innocenti this upcoming season. The caveat here is that we do best case within reason, worst case without injury. For Innocenti, the best case scenario for him is not that he leads the country in scoring, or that he leads Gonzaga in scoring, or that he scores 10 plus points per game, because that's not really the role. I suppose it's possible he averaged 10 points per game, but it is unlikely and not really within the scope of what we would consider his best case scenario for this season. Meanwhile, the worst case scenario is without injury. If injuries are a relevant part of a player's history, we will discuss them. For Innocenti, a minor hip injury a couple weeks ago that he seems to have recovered from does not seem to be on the radar and isn't going to be a part of this conversation. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti this upcoming season is that he begins the season in the starting lineup and ends the season in the starting lineup, that he holds on to a spot as a Gonzaga starter this entire season. He's either going to start alongside Adam Miller or Steele Venters is my projection, because Gonzaga will want that kind of offense-defense duo out there. If you start Innocenti and, say, Jalen Warley together, then you don't have enough offensive firepower out on the wing, because neither of those guys are particularly good scorers or floor spacers, which would limit the team offensively. Likewise, I don't think you're going to start Steele Venters and Adam Miller together. Both great shooters at a ton of spacing, could be on the floor in lineups together, but I don't think you start them together because they're not great defensively. And if you're playing both Huff and Ike, you then have kind of a pretty weak defensive lineup. I think it's possible, again, that Venters and Miller play together if Jalen Warley's playing the 4, because then you at least have a little bit more defense out there. But all that to say that Innocenti, if he does start, it is going to be in a lineup likely with one of the other floor spacers to give the team more balance. This is all also very dependent on how long it takes for Tyon Grant-Foster to earn Mark Few's trust in a consistent role within this lineup and rotation. From a talent perspective and from a dual two-way ability perspective, Tyon Grant-Foster probably should be the starter at the 3, but I don't think they're going to throw him out there until he is comfortable in the system, and Innocenti may be the benefactor of that early in the season. But the best case scenario for him is that whether he stays in the starting lineup, whether he drops out of the starting lineup, that he is consistently playing somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes per game. In an incredibly crowded front court or wing rotation backcourt, Innocenti playing 20 plus minutes every single night would be tremendous in terms of the amount of trust that Mark Few has in him and their belief in him as a valuable net positive player for this team. How this all happens in a best case scenario for Innocenti is that he continues to be one of the very best on-ball defenders in college basketball. He was that last year. He didn't get a ton of praise and attention for it nationally because people looked at the box score and saw that he averaged less than 2 points per game and didn't really consider whether that made an impact on the team or not. That was the extent of the research being done. Now we know how invaluable Innocenti was, and in a best case scenario, he continues to be that guy. He navigates ball screens at an elite level. He is constantly moving his feet, able to fight through those screens, keeps his man in front of him constantly. Gonzaga does not have the rim protectors on this route. They don't have a Chet Holmgren or a Brandon Clark to erase mistakes made by the perimeter defenders. When Gonzaga's perimeter defenders made mistakes last year, which was way too often, it led to easy points at the rim. It led to foul trouble for Gonzaga's bigs, or it led to open three after open three after open three, which is what happened in the Santa Clara game because the guards were able to start driving. The other guards would pinch in to try to prevent the player from driving all the way to the rim. Said player would kick it out to a three-point shooter, bang, and that was the issue. The best case scenario for Innocenti is that he prevents that from happening. He is so dynamic at getting through screens, at keeping his guy in front of him, that they're forced to reset the offense, that they're not able to get driving lanes available to them. And he is a complete menace and frustration for opposing guards all season long. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is he uses his active hands to get a lot of knockaways, to get a lot of pokes, to get a lot of steals and some transition opportunities. I think that Emmanuel Innocenti could realistically get 4 to 6 points per game just from getting steals and getting out in transition. It's not going to do that against every team, obviously, but there are games where that should be the expectation for Innocenti, is a couple of free points out in transition every single game because of his defense. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that his maturity continues to show on both ends of the floor, that we're seeing a player who's not biting on pump fakes, who's not committing stupid fouls away from the rim, who is able to be an impactful defensive player while playing exceptionally smart. And offensively, the best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that we see a lot of growth in his game, that he is not simply a ball mover. And to be clear, that is still going to be his role. This is how he was defined last year by Mark Few, by Ryan Nembhard. Ball mover effectively means, in Gonzaga's continuous motion offense, that his role was, when I get the ball, I keep it moving. It's not a complicated name for for what they called him. Keep the ball moving. Come off screens, find a post player if you can. If they're not there, swing it back around and let the offense keep on trucking along. Emmanuel Innocenti is not catching the ball and turning and squaring up and looking to make a move to score one-on-one in isolation. Unless there are 3 to 4 seconds left on the shot clock and for some reason the ball's in his hands, that should not be happening. And even in a best case scenario for Innocenti, that's not really the role that he's going to fill. But what we do see is that if needed, he can. He can contribute. He can put the ball on the deck against lesser competition. He can hit a mid-range jump shot. He can step out and hit an outside shot if needed to, but that the majority of the time he's on the floor offensively, he is just keeping things moving. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that he remains elite at avoiding turnovers. This is what made the great role players in Gonzaga history, the Kyle Drangineses, the Silas Melsons, the David Pendergraphs, the OG Mike Hart. What made them great is that most of their contributions may have come on defense, but offensively, they did not hurt you because they did not turn the basketball over, because they did not take and miss a lot of bad shots. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that he had 0.6 turnovers per 40 minutes last year. That means if you extrapolate him out to a full 40 minutes per game average, he's still barely averaged half a turnover per game. For reference, Ryan Nembhard was at 2.8. Obviously, he had the ball more, but that's a big difference. Dusty Stromer was at 1.4. Nolan Hickman, who was excellent at taking care of the basketball last year, was at 1.2. Still twice as many turnovers as Emmanuel Innocenti per 40 minutes. The best case scenario for Innocenti is that the outside shot ticks up. That now that he's been in the system, he understands his role, and because of the gravity of Graham Ike and Braden Huff, he gets some open looks from three, and he knocks them down at a higher clip. He was 31% at Tarleton, 29.5% last year. So the best case scenario for him, it would be incredible if he shot 40, but that would be a shock. Anything over 35% is a best case scenario in my mind for Emmanuel Innocenti. That's a big jump from year one to year two in Gonzaga's system. And he's not going to be a high volume guy. I think the best case scenario for Innocenti and for Gonzaga is that he's like 37, 38% on like 1.8, maybe 2 3-point attempts per game. Obviously, if he was shooting like 45% on 6 attempts per game, that would be incredible, but that's not really very realistic. Something like 2 attempts per game, 40-ish%, a little under 40% would be great for Gonzaga and great for Innocenti as well. The best case scenario for Innocenti is that his efficiency is at an all-time high. Again, 35+% from three, 55 to 60+% on twos. Again, if most of his scoring opportunity is in transition, there's no reason he should be shooting anything under 50% from 2-point shots. He shouldn't be taking contested twos. He shouldn't be, taking long twos, anything like that. Like his shot diet should mostly be transition opportunities at the rim and wide open 3-pointers. And in that case, he should be very efficient in both those areas. The best case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that he is the WCC Defensive Player of the Year, and there's not much debate. It's obvious that he deserves that award. The best case scenario is that he's also all WCC second team or honorable mention. Hard to imagine he makes the first team unless he scores way more than we expect him to, because scoring and points are still what is the primary decision-making around these awards. Whether it should be or not is a conversation for another time. But for Innocenti, if he was on the second team, averaging 5 points per game, that would be a tremendous accomplishment and a testament that people recognized and appreciated what he brought to this team on the defensive end of the floor. What are the worst-case scenarios for Emmanuel Innocenti? Well, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and somebody's going to get squeezed out of this rotation. And the worst-case scenario for Innocenti is that it's him. Is that his playing time ends up being sporadic. Maybe he plays 3, 4, 5 minutes one game. Maybe he plays 15 minutes the next game. And it's just inconsistent, and it's hard for him to get in a rhythm. It's hard for the team to get into a rhythm. And the return of Tyon Grant-Foster further complicates things in that wing rotation. Maybe Tyon Grant-Foster doesn't play a lot in the first month of the season, but that gradually ticks up, and that playing time starts to dissipate from Innocenti. Reasons that might happen would be, sure, his on-ball defense is still great, but maybe it's not dramatically better than what Tyon Grant-Foster is able to do, or than what Jalen Worley is able to do if he ends up playing more on the perimeter. And that the offensive impact that those players have, specifically Tyon Grant-Foster, is much more significant. And because the defense doesn't feel dramatically different, Gonzaga opts to play Grant-Foster much more than Innocenti, and it cuts into his playing time. The worst case scenario for Emmanuel Innocenti is that he makes too many mistakes. He's being too aggressive, too physical with opponents, getting called for fouls away from the rim. And he's just making mistakes. Maybe he gets backdoor cut on a handful of times. He's struggling to defend off the ball. And the defense, while still very good on the ball, is maybe lacking in other areas. But the most obvious worst case scenario for Innocenti is just that the offense isn't good enough to justify playing him as much as he could end up playing for this team. The ball mover status still applies. He's still out there doing that, but he's just not a threat to attack. He's not a threat to try to score. And opposing teams can kind of go 4-on-5. It feels like Gonzaga's going 4-on-5 against those teams when they're on offense. And again, because they have somebody like Grant-Foster or Worley or other options, they end up going with a different direction, and Innocenti's playing time stagnates or drops as the season goes on. Another worst case scenario option for Innocenti is that he tries to score more and struggles to do so. If Innocenti is taking very few shots, even if he's not super efficient, that wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be the worst case scenario because he's not on the floor to take a bunch of shots. If he takes 2 shots a game and instead of making them 60% of the time, it's like 40% of the time, you're going to accept that if the defense is good. But if he starts trying to take more shots, taking contested 2-point shots, attacking off the dribble when he shouldn't be doing that, and his efficiency is bad, that's going to get him a very quick ticket to the bench. To be clear, I don't expect that to happen. One of the things that made Innocenti so valuable last year was he seemed to understand his role on both ends of the floor. It would be regression for him to not understand that this year, but it certainly would fall in that category of worst case scenario. Statistically, the worst case scenario for Innocenti probably doesn't look that much different than last year, but we're expecting growth. We're expecting him to average more than 12 minutes per game when the season is all said and done. We're expecting him to play more like those 20, 22 minutes per game that he did toward the end of the regular season. And if he ends up on the fringes of this rotation or out of the rotation, that is going to be a worst case scenario for him by a considerable amount. Well, what do we think Innocenti's specific role, specific production is going to look like this upcoming season? How might Tyon Grant-Foster's return impact that? And what might Innocenti's future in Spokane be? We're going to talk about all that to close out the show coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings that same intention to how they craft every make and model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship when every detail, from the metallic accents to available Nappa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season, because with Mazda, everyday drives feel like anything but. From smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like college basketball players and Zag players in particular, Mazda sweats every detail. And because when you make every move count, impossible, well, it becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show, finalizing our Emmanuel Innocenti player preview episode with less than a week until the season gets underway. We talked about Innocenti's arrival in Spokane after his freshman season at Tarleton State. We talked about what we saw from him that year, and then we also talked about what we think are his best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. Now we're going to take a look at his projected role and projected expectations and kind of overall statistical performance this upcoming season. We're going to talk about his future as well. Whether Emmanuel Innocenti starts or not still remains to be seen. I don't feel incredibly confident one way or another. I would have told you last week that I did not expect him to start this year. And while I don't think that him starting an exhibition game, especially with the Tyon Grant-Foster situation, what it was, necessarily means that he is going to start this season, but it certainly feels more likely than it did prior to that game. I will say this. Emmanuel Innocenti has earned a consistent, regular role in this rotation. And while last year you look and you say, well, he played 31 games and he played 13 minutes a game. Isn't that a consistent role? Yeah, kind of. By the second half of the year, it was unquestionably a consistent role. But again, he did not play much at the very beginning of the season or even getting into conference play. He was playing most nights, but a lot of the time he was only playing in garbage time. I wouldn't consider that a consistent role. For reference, Dominic Harris and Julian Strother, I believe in the 2020-21 season when Gonzaga went to the national championship game, both those guys played 25 games and both those guys played like 7 minutes a night. That looks like a regular role. It wasn't. It just happened to be that Gonzaga beat the doors off of everybody they played that year, so those guys got into most games in garbage time. For Innocenti, this year should look like a boost from last year. He should play every single night, assuming he is healthy, and either he will start or play a significant role off the bench. What I do know is that Mark Few loves rewarding a handful of different archetypes. He loves rewarding returners. He's always valued players who are loyal and come back to the program. He's also always loved rewarding veteran players who are upperclassmen. And Innocenti is now a senior and one of only a junior and one of only 4 players who played rotation minutes for this team last year. Mark Few also loves rewarding players who do the dirty work, who are tough on defense. Innocenti is every single one of those things. He is a veteran. He is a returner. He is a tough-nosed defender. I've talked about this before on the show as kind of a media guide of sorts. Always pay attention when Mark Few or any coach for whatever program you're talking about or listening about, whenever a coach brings up a player unprompted, that is a significant thing to keep an eye on. If you directly ask Mark Few, what did you think about Jalen Worley's performance? And he answers, and you pull that quote and you put it in an article, great. I don't think Mark Few's lying about any of those things, but it doesn't carry the same weight as when Mark Few chooses to bring a certain player up or a certain play up. If he's talking about it, that means it's what's on his mind. And that to me is more significant. In the post-game press conference after Gonzaga's win over Western Oregon, when asked about the wing depth, when asked about kind of the amount of players they have options at those spots, Mark Few specifically brought up Emmanuel Innocenti. He brought up the difference that he makes on this team when he is on the floor because of his defensive intensity. And he said this at times last year too, he makes the entire team better because of his defensive energy. That is a tremendous compliment. And to me, an incredibly clear sign. As soon as I heard him say that, my first thought was, well, my projections, which came out like last week on minutes per game for Innocenti, were wrong. He is going to play more than I thought because Mark Few does not say that about anybody. And yes, I do think it is at least in some way significant that he started in that game against Western Oregon. It may not mean much. Again, he only played 12 minutes because he was still nursing that hip injury, but he started. I don't think Mark Few would start him willy-nilly. Like, it certainly is at least in some way significant, whether it was a tryout for a starting spot, whether it is the fact that he is planned to be the starter. It could be a smoke screen for the start of the season, but I kind of don't think so. I think that there's a pretty good chance Innocenti starts and Steele Venters starts and Adam Miller comes off the bench. I think that could really work and be a valuable starting lineup for this team, especially while Tyon Grant-Foster is still learning the ropes. Whether that changes, who knows? Maybe Grant-Foster enters the starting lineup, Venters slides down to the 2. Maybe Grant-Foster enters the starting lineup and Miller also enters the starting lineup. Maybe Grant-Foster and Innocenti start together and you just have a really good defensive lineup. But whether Innocenti starts a few games, every game, no games, he's going to play. And I think it's going to look a pretty fair amount like what we saw in those final 10 games of the WCC regular season. Again, as a reminder, statistically, for what that looked like, Innocenti averaged about 22 minutes per game, about 4 points, about 3.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. That feels about right. Again, he's not going to play 30 minutes a night. Gonzaga has so much depth on the wing that they don't need to play any of those wings 30 minutes a night. I don't think Grant-Foster or Miller or Venters or Fogel or any of those guys, Worley, are going to play anywhere close to 30 minutes a night. The only players on this team who will are Braden Smith, and if they avoid foul trouble, the 2 bigs, Braden Huff and Graham Ike. That's it. Everybody else should be around 25 minutes because this team has the depth and the specialized skills to play those guys, to not have to rely on those guys as much as they've relied on some of their starters in the past. For Innocenti, I think that his scoring increases a little bit, but I think it not dramatically, nor should it increase dramatically, but something like 22 minutes a game, maybe 4.5 points, maybe 3.5 boards, 2 assists per game, something like that would be great. I'd love to see him over a steal per game. I think he's going to be able to do that. We saw him just ripping the ball away from guys at Western Oregon. Yes, competition level will be better, but I don't have any doubt that Emmanuel Innocenti can rip the ball away from guys at Texas Southern, guys at Campbell, guys at North Florida, guys at Pepperdine. Like, he should be able to do that just fine. I do think Emmanuel Innocenti will be a more efficient scorer as well. In fact, I feel quite confident in saying that. The sample size was pretty small last year, but the efficiency was not good. It will be better. I don't know that he's going to be 40% from 3. I don't even know that he's going to be 35% from 3, but I bet he's like 33 at least. 32, 33 would be pretty good on a low volume. I would take that. It's enough that it forces defenses to honor you. If you're shooting 33% on 1.5 attempts per game, defenses, they're not going to put you at the top of their scouting report, but they're going to at least acknowledge, like, hey, yeah, you can't leave him alone out there. Or if hey, the strategy, we're going to try to leave him alone, Innocenti is going to make you pay. He's going to knock a few of those down, and you're going to have to adjust your defense. 2-point wise, he should be close to 55, 60%, because most of his 2-point shots, like I said earlier, should be out in transition, wide open at the cup. So he should be hitting at a high clip for those shots. I don't actually think Innocenti will win Defensive Player of the Year, but I suspect that we'll be having a conversation about it. I think there's going to be people saying he's deserved it. And I think that's a great outcome for Innocenti, is if we're saying he should have been the WCC Defensive Player of the Year, and instead they gave it to one of the 7-footers at St. Mary's because their team defense was better. That's a conversation I wouldn't be shocked if we're having in early March. Looking at the future for Innocenti, worth remembering, he does have one more year of eligibility after this year. This is his junior year. Next year, 26-27 will be his senior year. Grant-Foster, Warley, Miller, all those guys will be gone. Venters could return. So if you expect him to be back, Fogel obviously will be back. Luca Foster will be coming in on the wing. Braden Smith, Mario St. Superi should be back as well. But that still leaves plenty of opportunity for Innocenti to take on a very big role as a senior glue guy type dude for Gonzaga in that 26-27 season. We always end these shows talking about NBA future. For Innocenti, it's just not there. It's just not there because the offense isn't there. Like, he is an NBA caliber defender. And he's got, at 6'5", and with his strength, he is the proper size to be an NBA 2 guard. There's just not enough offense. He would either have to become a playmaker and like an NBA caliber playmaking guard, which just does not feel likely at all, or he'd have to become a knockdown, lights out 3-point shooter to get a chance in the NBA. But he's from Italy. There are plenty of elite basketball leagues over in Europe and in Italy. Specifically, if you wanted to go home and play professional basketball, he could have a 10-plus year career very, very easily. And I suspect, knowing him, would be a fan favorite wherever he ends up playing after his time at Gonzaga is over. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We got one more show before we are officially talking 2025-26 season. Our show on Friday will be our bold predictions. So bold, they are spooky because it will be Halloween. And then, of course, next Monday, we're going to get you ready for that game against Texas Southern. And we're going to be all the way in the thick of this thing until March, hopefully until April. That's going to be it for me today, folks. Thanks again. And as always, go Zags.